My name's Dolan Cummings. I'm an Associate Fellow of the Institute of Ideas. I'll be chairing the debate. The topic is from banning burqas to B&B bigots. Can Europe tolerate religious tolerance? So that slightly confusing title reflects a slightly confusing debate, I think. There's a general consensus that Europe has been a secular part of the world and also tolerant part of the world, where religion has been practiced fairly freely, much of the time with few curbs. But recent developments, such as the banning of the burqa in France, banning of minarets in Switzerland, suggest that perhaps there's worry that some forms of religion, particularly Islam, cannot be tolerated. Even in Britain, though, we have peculiar concerns about religious discrimination even from Christians. Chris Grilling MP made a comment about suggesting maybe B&B owners should be allowed to turn away gay customers, which of course caused a huge outcry. So again, it's a question about how secular is secular. Does the state have a responsibility to ensure equality when it comes into conflict with values of tolerance? So I'm sure you're all familiar with that debate. Let me introduce the speakers. First to speak will be on the far left, Nathalie Rothschild, who's a commissioning editor at Spiked and coordinator of Young Journalists Academy and UK correspondent of Judisk Krönika. Second will be Abid Raja on my right, who's the chair of Minotek in Norway and the author of Dialogue on Violence, Suppression and Extremism, and recently won the Freedom of Speech Prize in Norway. I should say this session is in partnership with the British Council, which operates in Norway and elsewhere. Third to speak will be Bruno Waterfield on my left, who's a Brussels correspondent for the Daily Telegraph and author of No Means No, a pamphlet on the EU. And then finally, will be Dr. Evan Harris, who's a campaigner for secularism in the public sphere, a former science spokesman for Liberal Democrats, and writer of The Guardian's political science blog. He's also on the advisory board of the Social Liberal Forum. Right, okay, where did it go? Nathalie.
On the surface, it looks like Europe is in the grips of a new culture war, a clash of civilizations with religious minorities and their defenders on the one side, and atheists and defenders of the Enlightenment on the other. The question of what place religion has in a modern 21st century society appears to be divisive and contentious. Yet from the burqa battles in Europe to the debates around faith schools in the UK, what's clear is that what's really at stake in the West today is tolerance. Today, the modern ideal of tolerance is under attack by those authoritarians who want the state to ban religious symbols, but it's also under attack by those who say that religious practices should not just be allowed, but must also be respected, even celebrated, and even safeguarded through laws. As early as 1689, John Locke, who we know is known as the father of liberalism, recognized that, as he put it, the care of every man's soul belongs unto himself. Our inner lives, argued Locke, are not the business of government. He recognized that it's neither morally right nor practically possible to change a person's belief by force, but also acknowledged that we should all have the freedom to persuade others that they are wrong. It is one thing to persuade, another to command, he wrote. One thing to press with arguments, another with penalties. In other words, a genuinely tolerant society is one where people are allowed to believe what they want and where everyone else is allowed to criticize them for it. It's also a society which demands that the state butts out of individual consciences. Neither those who demand that religious symbols be protected from criticism, nor the burqa banners and religion bashers are upholding such a defense of tolerance. So, in appealing to the politics of respect, defenders of religious minorities have demanded not just that minorities be included in societies despite their differences, which is perfectly reasonable, but also that their identities be safeguarded by the state. So we get laws against so-called religious hatred, for instance, which have been introduced in several European countries. They represent one such safeguard. But this turns tolerance on its head, transforming it into a tool of liberty infringement in the name of protecting minorities from being offended. Of course, tolerating something doesn't mean you also have to respect it. In fact, you can tolerate another person's views even if you disagree with them. You can tolerate women wearing the burqa even if you think it's primitive to do so. In a genuinely tolerant society, Muslim women would be allowed to wear the burqa, and the rest of us would be allowed to think that they're backward and even to tell them so. Now, here in Britain, the Equality Act, which was passed early this month by the government, is another example of government-ordered respect. Its purpose is to protect people from offence in the workplace, whether real or perceived, as it puts it, in relation not just to their religion, but also ethnicity, sexual orientation, and gender. Again, the state here is making its business to force us to respect each other's ideas and to tell us what's acceptable or not acceptable to say and think about different religions and lifestyles. The state is going beyond its remit, adjudicating over our minds, thoughts, and interpersonal relationships. Religious associations in the UK have understandably warned that the Equality Act may lead to private societies being compelled to accept everyone into their associations, even if that threatens their integrity. So, for instance, they've warned that a church might be obliged to ordain female priests, that a Jewish school might have to accept pupils and teachers who are not Jewish according to religious law, Catholic adopting agencies won't be allowed to turn away gay couples, and so on. The early Enlightenment thinkers, in the interest of protecting religious groups from censorship and oppression, opposed the authorities' impulse to meddle in religious associations' affairs. So one would think that today's humanists would also be averse to this development. Yet the secularist lobby in this country protested loudly that the Equality Act doesn't go far enough in forcing people to respect diversity. Secularists, too, are clamouring for the politics of respect. They say that the state has a duty to safeguard the non-religious from discrimination as well. I think while Britain's blasphemy laws have thankfully been abolished, today atheists are deferring to secular arbiters like diversity and equality regulators to administer verdicts on people they view as modern-day heretics. Where the church once laid down the law on what was sinful and persecuted non-believers, banishing them from public institutions, today religious people can find themselves subjected to disciplinary hearings, and they even risk getting sacked for being open about their faiths. Take, for instance, the Christian nurse who was suspended last year for offering to pray for patients. The UK National Secular Society defended this, saying that she'd failed in her duty to demonstrate a personal and professional commitment to equality and diversity. But this nurse had not failed in her duties as a nurse. She hadn't refused to care for non-Christians. She wasn't taking blood tests with rusty needles or feeling up her patients. She simply offered them, a couple of them, prayers for an easy recovery, yet she was suspended and subjected to a disciplinary hearing. So the politics of respect has warped the ideal of tolerance. In the name of respecting difference, we're expected to give up our rights openly to express our opinions about various belief systems and practices, or to assert that some values are more valid than others. And in the name of respecting inclusion, we are expected to give up our right to discriminate, to choose who we associate with. The idea of a secular state sprang from a struggle for religious freedom, that is, for the freedom to practice one's beliefs without fear of persecution or state diktat. A secular state, separated from the church, is one which does not promote one faith above others and which does not dictate what is and is not permissible to believe. So anyone who wants Europe to be a genuinely tolerant place should resist the efforts to turn the state into an arbiter of what can and cannot be believed.
I'm from Norway. It's a fairly small country, taking into consideration its population, which is only 4.9 million people. 250,000 of them are from non-Western countries and 120,000 Muslims in Norway. Taking into consideration the population and our richness and being the best country in the world after the UN's statistics, the level of tension is quite small comparing to countries like UK, France, or other countries. But still, we have our things, to mention a few of them to let you know about Norway. We, of course, had the debate on cartoons as well, the cartoons on Prophet Muhammad. Recently, another newspaper published another cartoon, which was a pig, which was called Muhammad, who was standing with his feet inside a book with written Quran on it. To protest against this, Muslims started marching, and they decided to have a public prayer downtown Oslo. same as what they did in Bern in Switzerland because of the cartoons in Denmark. We know what happened in Switzerland. Of course, it's their right to have the prayers outside the Bern Parliament, but let me also know, is that a very smart thing to do, or are you scaring the public for these mullahs who are not going to take over our society? At the same march, on the protest march, public speakers stood up and said if Norway doesn't learn, 9/11 could happen. It wasn't meant as a threat, as they said. It was just a warning. In these days, also people emerged who talked about that homosexuals, they deserve to die or even to be killed. We have had our issues about people going to other countries, to madrasas, to get radicalized. But the new thing now is the self-radicalization. You're sitting at home on your internet, you have your small boys group, or you have an organization on university who makes people from other countries come to Norway to talk about that symbolic violence against wives are okay, homosexuals should have death penalties, and they defend the conspiracy theories on 9/11, for example, that it was Americans or maybe Jews who was behind it. So the question for us could be, what should we do as a society, both as a government but also as the civil society? Hijab, 8th of March last year, at the International Day of Women's Rights, the hijab was burned in Oslo. The prior cabinet minister for equality from the Labour Party, she said that hijab is as bad as, or as the same as women genital mutilation. Of course, you have the right-wing party as well in Oslo. It's a quite big party in Norway, second largest party. And the leader of their party in Oslo said that hijab is the same as Ku Klux Klan hood. And you have other people also saying things about hijab, like it's not just covering your head, but it's also covering your brain. Last year, a girl wanted to start on police academy, and she asked whether she could wear her hijab. The Minister of Justice said yes. It was an outcry in the media, and the Prime Minister himself had to step in and stop it. And forgetting that the man we gave the Peace Prize to, Nobel Peace Prize to, and what his speech was about the hijab in Cairo. Okay, I will move on. This is giving you a brief idea of what's going on in Norway. We're still 20, 30 years behind UK when it comes to religion tensions, but it's coming out. We can start having some questions about limiting the rights to build minarets, or limiting the rights to wear hijab burqas. Is that actually limiting somebody's rights? Or you can ask the question, are you really free to choose if you are actually want to choose a burqa? Or is your upbringing in the culture itself so much suppressing that you don't have any choice, that you have to choose that? Are all values good? Customs and cultures, are they equally good? Or should we discuss those and try to change cultures that we find not good in this society? Is bread and butter policy good enough? Just bring them education, give them jobs, and the values will change by themselves? Or should we do more than that? Should we have actual debates on values? One question asked in the outline here in the program is, should we be free to discriminate according to our own conscience? I would say no. We should have common values about the law, the equality, the respect for law, basic human rights. To understand values, we have to discuss them and have arguments about them. I will end this by also discussing what is secularism. We're discussing this in the break just before coming in here. And on one hand, people will say secularism is in favor of democracy. If you are in favor of democracy, that's secularism. Other people will say if you're secular, you're non-religious. You will believe that religious has no say in your life. And if you ask that question to a Muslim youth, he will have problem answering the question, because if he thinks that secularism is the same as being non-believer, then he will say no. And if the question who's asking the question is putting in secularism that you are a favor of democracy or not, then you have a huge difference in what actually secularism is. And we also have to address the issue of what the terminology actually means, and are we actually not discussing the same things, but we are putting different things in the different words.
I think Nathalie's point is very, very important. The multicultural respect agenda let the state into the realm of regulating disputes or cases of offence in terms of religious sensibilities, and all kinds of people have played that game because it suits them. So, for example, Christian Democrats in The Hague, in the Netherlands, who are quite keen to bring the authorities into questions of religion, have been very keen to have Muslim women-only swimming sessions. Baths have been very keen to give subsidies for Muslims to turn churches into mosques, in return for them getting the same kind of subsidies too, because they want the state to be more of a player because it suits their kind of agenda as well. So I think that's very, very important. But I want to put it in the context as well of a much, much wider trend for the state to intervene in social life on the assumption that people can't deal with often relatively straightforward disputes. And I think it may sound counterintuitive, but one of the real preconditions for this kind of contagion of burqa bans across Europe is actually smoking bans. And smoking bans rely on very, very similar spurious grounds. One is smoking bans essentially rest on the idea that smoking is offensive because it pollutes, and that pollution really is a metaphor for people doing things in public that are frowned upon. And the smoking ban has become a way in which the state intervenes in bars and in cafes, and perhaps next even in people's homes, to regulate this kind of polluting activity. And it does this even though, of course, bars and cafes and we in our homes, we're perfectly capable of sorting out these problems ourselves. So most of us who have a home and entertain in it, when we are entertaining a smoker, we're quite capable of setting down the rules by which a smoker will operate in our home. It really isn't something that the state needs to get involved in, because actually people can deal with these problems themselves. And burqas are a bit like that, funnily enough. People who wear burqas or wearing a burqa may seem stupid or even offensive to some people, but so what? I mean, so what? It's a bit like someone smoking. It's not a really egregious offence against you or an individual if you have to pass somebody in the street who's covered up their face. I mean, we tolerate all kinds of stupid behaviour. I'm infuriated by people's public use of iPods, for example. It does incense me much more than people who wear burqas. But I'm robust enough when people are driving me absolutely insane on a long train journey to just ask them to turn it down a bit so I don't have to listen to their crappy music too. And I think I would be confident in my own ability to negotiate if I was holding a meeting in a private building, or I wanted to have a proper discussion face-to-face with somebody. I'd be able to negotiate the burqa issue. My sister, Esther, is a school governor in Stepney Green. And Stepney Green is an area of London that has one of the highest proportions in the country of women who wear the burqa. My sister tells me that in all the time she's been involved in a school, and she's involved in a school, she has children at the school, they've never had a problem negotiating with the 5 or 6 women who wear the burqa for school. These overwhelmingly Muslim, and so these people who wear the burqa are actually pretty unrepresentative. They've never had a problem negotiating the issue. People do get outside the school hot and bothered about it, but people themselves are able to negotiate this every day, because although we may disagree with people wearing a burqa, we may find it offensive, we are able to negotiate it in our personal relationships with it. And surely, again, it's a self-defeating ordinance. When I was a lot younger, in the days when the music was still alive, I was a punk. And it was really only because of the music, actually. The music was very good, and you could go and see bands like The Clash, and it was pretty good. And it was incredible sometimes. You'd pick up a copy of the Daily Mail, and there'd be this diatribe about how punk rock is about to overthrow civilization. These kind of gobbing, kind of V-sign anarchists are the biggest threat to civilization. But we know it and thought, my God, we thought it was about music. This is serious. I mean, we're really, we're important, and we must be oppressed or something because Daily Mail doesn't like us. I mean, we must be very, very serious. Of course, it was just music, and I would predict that the Daily Mail encouraged the growth of punk rock by advertising it in such a way, and I predict that there will be a hot trade in burqas in places like Brussels in Belgium, where they have been banned by posing them as this very offensive, very traumatic experience. They're encouraging people with a rebellious bent, even rather than a slavish or violated disposition to actually wear burqas. Another point that we have to bear in mind is how the state intervention and the state bans or proposals to ban the burqa actually fuel intolerance in people's relationships with each other. There's a case that happened 2 weeks ago, a very well-educated, very sophisticated, very urbane, she was in a very expensive shop, female lawyer in Paris who attacked a woman wearing a burqa, and she attacked her and tore it off her face. And whilst the case hasn't come to court yet, from the media coverage, we understand that this woman lawyer felt entitled that she could do this, that she could assault somebody else, because after all, the burqa was about to be banned. And I really think we need to get a bit of a grip. I mean, some of the people who talk about burqa bans and people who built political careers on it, such as Geert Wilders, really do overstate their case. I mean, he compares kind of few cranks and loonies who are fundamentalist Islamists. He compares the threat to the Western civilization or to civilization as with the Nazis. He says these people are comparable threat to civilization as the Nazis. And that's infantile. It's absurd. I mean, do you really believe it? I mean, get a grip. Anyone who thinks a handful of women with a sheet over their head are a threat to our way of life, you've lost the plot. You really have lost the plot. You need to get a grip and you need to grow up. In Belgium, the day the parliament banned the burqa, the government fell. The government couldn't even agree on how to run their own country. They couldn't even hold a vote on it, they disagreed so much. But every single MP in the Belgian parliament could agree to ban the burqa because it oppresses women and it's a threat to security and all the rest of it. Now that is a sign of a country that has lost its grip. That is a sign of a government that is utterly irrelevant to real problems facing its country. It's much easier to intervene in our lives. It's much easier to create new problems between people than actually get on with it and sort out some real problems.
Thank you. Well, what I want to do is set out what I think is the mainstream secular view of what secularism wants. And I wrote something in The Guardian called the Secularist Manifesto, which I'm hoping to tweak, but have accepted as what we're seeking to obtain. And I think it's different from what religious people describe secularism as. I mean, I don't know any secularist who's militant or aggressive, but that's what we're always described as. And secularism is often attacked by religious leaders unitedly in a way that helps them defend their privileges. So what secularism is about is seeking to defend. This is my definition of secularism, and I hope, as I say, after consultation will be put out there as sort of the mainstream movement. It's about defending the absolute freedom of religious belief, okay, whatever that is, or indeed any other belief system, and to maximise the manifestation of that belief insofar as it doesn't disproportionately restrict the rights and freedoms of others, and to end religious privilege and persecution by or of religious people, and to separate religion and the state, which is a necessary means to the end of those things. There's good evidence that while you have a link between the state and any one religion or religion itself, it's very difficult to obtain maximum freedom of religion and belief, maximum freedom to manifest, and ending religious privilege. And that's why the first thing on the Secular Manifesto is to protect free expression. So protect all expression that doesn't directly incite crime or publicly and directly, using threatening language, attacks someone individually, publicly and directly, which is why we led the opposition to the government's proposed religious hatred bill in 2005, which had a very wide offence that merely using words or language that caused offence, which were insulting or abusive, whether or not you intended to do so on the grounds of someone's religion, would be a criminal offence. And that was defeated by one vote, but it justified my 13 years in Parliament, I think. Why we led the call for the end to the blasphemy law, why we have opposed consistently the attempts at the UN by religious states to have a defamation of religion law, and why we oppose burqa bans for the reasons that have been given, and I'll go into that a little. But I'm a little confused about some of the points made in this debate. I'll just say a couple of other things that we do. We want, when people are delivering public services, whether they're religious or not, and you can't discriminate against religious organisations saying anyone else can deliver public services but you can't, but we can say that they shouldn't discriminate on the grounds of religion or sexual orientation against their employees delivering public services or against users of public services, and they shouldn't be able to use the public service and the funding they get for that to proselytise. They have the ability to do that outside of delivering the public service. We also would say that the right of conscientious objection, that we want to limit the right of conscientious objection of people delivering public services, like pharmacists and judges and marriage registrars, to specific narrow grounds approved by Parliament, rather than someone saying, more religiously, I'm just not going to provide sexual health services for unmarried women or something on religious grounds. Because it's religious, I should be privileged not to have to do that part of my job. And to ensure that there is reasonable adjustment for religious practice in employment, so Sikhs, turban wearers in the police force and so forth, prayer rooms in large employers, without imposing that on everyone, without insisting that everyone should do it, and without saying any time you say you have a religious reason why you need to do something, that however subjective that is, that's automatic. So let's look at the Equality Act, because I was confused by what Nathalie said, because she said, I think first, that there was too much respect being expected for religion by the state, that the state was encouraging people to celebrate it and respect it, but at the same time there was too little respect for religion, because the law does not allow National Health Service nurses to impose their religious views on their patients, and certainly professional codes don't do that. So doctors and nurses have to understand that they're there to treat the patient, and whatever their religious or political views, they can't impose that on the patient. And if the patient wants someone to pray, they're directed away from the health service to the nearest priest, and there are, I understand, quite a lot of priests and vicars in this country to do that. But I think she was arguing that no, we should allow public service workers to spend time praying as part of their job and asking every patient if they want that. And I don't think that's right. Similarly, they might argue that marriage registrars should be able to say that they're not going to provide their service to same-sex couples. I mean, I don't see the difference between allowing that sort of discrimination and allowing marriage registrars to say they're not going to provide the service for mixed-race couples. I think if you're delivering a public service, then people should be free from discrimination in receipt of that public service. No one's forcing you to believe something, but if you're doing a job that involves non-discrimination, I think that's a public good, and the state, I think, has a role in ensuring that people aren't discriminated against, then I think you have to accept that you're not going to be able to express your prejudices, if I can put it that way, I don't mean that judgmentally, in terms of discrimination. Let's look at the equality laws. I'm not happy with them, so I'm going to talk about the equalities I'd like to see, but I can deal with the areas that were raised. Nathalie elided the provision whereby there's a general view that people delivering public services, like adoption, that's the adoption of children, shouldn't discriminate against people without justification, simply because it's a religious or racial or sexist view, with the idea that churches will be forced to ordain women or have gay priests. The law is very clear, and rightly so, both European law and British law, that something that is in terms of a public service, you can't have discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation, but private activity and religious activity is exempted from that. Now, the churches want to go further. They want to be able to say that their secretaries and caretakers can't be gay or can't lose the faith. And equality law does protect, or seeks to, or should protect people from that sort of discrimination. But it certainly doesn't go to proselytizing roles, because a secular law in this way protects the freedom of people to have religious belief. And if you're a club that says, if you want to be a priest in my club, you have to believe this and you mustn't put this bits of your body in that person's bits, then that's your business. And the last thing we want is to do that. Finally, I want, because it was raised, the elision, so there was an elision there between priests and adoption agencies, and thank goodness they are separate. But there is this question of an elision between a smoking ban and a burqa ban. I mean, I was one of the people that voted on the question of the smoking ban, and I didn't do it on the basis that smoking was offensive. I didn't hear that raised at all. It was something to do, and you may disagree with this, but this was the basis for it, about smoking in enclosed public places or workplaces was damaging to someone else's health, did impinge the rights and freedoms of others. There was no question of extending it to someone's home, even to protect the vulnerable children in that home who might be damaged from it. So to argue that it might be, therefore it was wrong to do it, where it was right to do it, is crazy. And I just look forward to the Brussels correspondent of the Telegraph, as his predecessor, his famous predecessor did, or one of them, Boris Johnson. I hope that he will say that the same libertarian views on smoking in public places, where the state is deciding what you shouldn't do, should extend to our drug laws, where the state shouldn't really be telling adults that they are criminalized by, for example, smoking cannabis, where there may well be an argument in terms of education for seeking to prevent children from smoking at all. And I hope they will oppose compulsory prayer in our state schools. I don't know if Bruno does, but I look forward to the day that Telegraph libertarians say that the state should not force children to pray in schools or have religious instruction in state schools. There is a disconnect between, I think, covered or not by a burqa, the brains of some right-wing libertarians. I exclude Bruno from this, so I hope he'll be consistent throughout this debate in respect of those issues.
Okay, thank you. Direct questions there for Nathalie and Bruno, but I'll let you get back to those in a bit after the questions, because we've only got 20 minutes. So I'm going to take as many questions or comments as I can.
You haven't been very specific about the niqab or burqa, anybody on the panel, about whether you would be happy to see a day when you get served in a chemist, tried in court, taught, or whatever, wearing a niqab. And the other thing is, by someone wearing a niqab. The other question is that about the jilbab, which is that full-length female gear, that there was a huge court case that went one way and then the other about, that there is the problem of peer pressure in schools, that if one girl puts on the whole religious regalia, the others will feel under pressure from their menfolk or whatever to do the same.
This is directed to Bruno. I think the analogy that you made about the iPods and the burqa is a rather poor one. I mean, I think, your intolerance of iPods is sort of, a bit of irritation on the tube journey home or something. I think most people's dislike of the burqa doesn't stem from a mere intolerance at the sight of it. First of all, there's the issue of identity, covering up your identity. So, I don't think anyone, whether it's a burqa or anything else, wants to be dealing with people who you can't actually see and respond to properly. And the second thing is, contrary to your sort of personal dislike of iPods, there's the issue that many people who dislike the burqa dislike it for reasons that they feel that women who wear it are subjugated and have to wear it not out of personal choice. I know that there's a lot of debates about the extent to which that is the case, but I think there's quite a big difference between that and your iPod story.
Well, I think this whole burqa thing is a very complicated question, and I resent the trivialization of it by comparing it to smoking and iPods as well. The burqa is a symbol of a whole package of traditions that humiliate women and don't give them equal rights and so on. So we are talking about something that is quite significant. It's not the same as the Sikh turban, because there's no associated problems with the Sikh turban. But the burqa, the covering up of women, that whole debate around what women should and shouldn't wear is something completely different. Seems to me that if we are living in a secular state, as far as I'm concerned, secularism is about separation of the church and the state. And that means that one of the things that we do need to do is make sure that burqa coverings are not allowed in state affairs. I think that there's no way you can personally, if you're at all a liberal, you cannot possibly object, even though I feel sick and I feel like throwing up every time I see a woman wearing a burqa. But you cannot possibly object to them in any private sphere or in public. But you definitely can, if we're living in a secular state, object to them wearing these things in schools, in universities, and in civil public bureaucracies. Schools, because first thing, this is the thin end of the wedge. So first of all, the girl comes in wearing a burqa, then they're not allowed to do physical education exercises, then they're not allowed to sit next to a boy, and it goes on and on. I know this. I grew up in a Muslim country, and this is exactly the process that it takes.
Okay.
I would be really interested for you to discuss a bit the connection between faith and morality, which is very interesting, because wearing a burqa is a symbol of a kind of submission towards another form of morality from another part of the world that's quite fundamental and extremist, and quite sad, really. And it's also a kind of warped vision of the Muslim or Islamic values, and it threatens more than anything Muslim people who are sort of middle of the road and want to just practice their religion peacefully in a secular society. So that's probably, there's a deeper reason why people find it offensive. I think I've probably covered the same ground as a woman before about the iPods. Okay.
The two arguments about why people find the burqa offensive. The first one, just about basically women and their freedom to dress as they want to. Well, I think that should apply to all types of clothing. If you want to wear revealing and sexy clothing, that's your choice. And if you want to cover, that's your choice. And the reason why women make those choices to wear the burqa is based on their religious belief that they should be covered and that they shouldn't be looked at by other men that aren't in their family. And that's their own belief to practice. And they're not opposing it on other people by wearing it innocently down the street. They're just practicing their own belief and to the level that they want. So if they want to cover their face or they just want to cover their head, that's their own personal belief and their own personal right to practice that belief. And about security as well, because women are doing that for their own religious reasons, it's been said by imams or leaders of our faith that it's okay for identification purposes to show your face to people. So all the issues about ID and women or security reasons, well, they're invalid now. So what else have we got?
Okay, thanks. At the front and then back to the panel.
I'd just like to second that statement. I find it really terrifying that pretty much everyone on this panel and who has spoken, apart from the last speaker, has been really surprisingly negative about the burqa. There's been talk of sort of it being threatening somehow, that it's disgusting, that it makes you feel like you want to throw up when you see someone wearing an article of clothing. I've seen much worse clothing. It doesn't bother me that much. But, and also this talk about it being a primitive, backwards thing to do, the women's menfolk. I think that this is a symbol generally about how Muslim women are really excluded from the discourse about this in the first place, not by their menfolk, not by their religion, but by the people who are having this discussion. They're not allowed to be part of this discussion. A liberal society in general, and a liberal rule that values women's rights should not be telling women what they can and can't wear. And I think saying that someone else is trying to tell these women what they can and can't wear and they're poor, delicate creatures and we must protect them is a terrible form of chauvinism that we as a society should not be engaging in.
I think Bruno did raise an important point in saying that these things usually can be better and more effectively negotiated in an informal manner. And when you let the state in to spheres of, to negotiate interpersonal relationships, you're actually damaging those relationships further. So if you take the Christian nurse, for instance, as far as I remember the case, she'd offered to pray for 2 patients. One of them said, "No, thank you, can you please get on with, dressing my leg sores?" The second person didn't say anything but told a relative or something like that what had happened, and the relative found it very offensive and complained, and she was then dragged in front of a disciplinary hearing with the blessing of the secular society. And actually, what consequences does this have for the workplace and for her relations with her patients and her employers and so on? It's going to infect it even further. On the burqas or niqabs or whatever they're called, I think they are a problem because they're an impediment to women's social mobility, and not to mention to their vision and their physical mobility. I have never worn one, but I can imagine it's pretty difficult to see under there. So it impedes their ability to engage with fellow citizens and to be a full member of society, and that's a problem. But I think the burqa is a symbol of oppression. It's a symbol of, a kind of secondary position of women, and attacking the symbol of oppression doesn't get rid of it. So I think it's really starting from the wrong end.
Okay, Abid, do you want to respond quickly?
I like to say we moderate and liberals, we have the ability to make people who disagree with us to make them hush up. I mean, you are not racist if you are against burqas. Do not fear to stand up for your opinion. I'm a Muslim and I'm not in the favor of burqas. Why would a woman wear a burqa freely? And burqa is not the only thing who's suppressing the woman. It's behind the burqa lies a line of suppression that makes the woman actually want to wear the burqa in a grown-up age, and that we have to address. And I have to say one more thing, and the liberal is not the same as accepting violence against women or homosexuals or religion or everything. Liberalism is not without values and morals, and liberalism is not without ability to differ between right and wrong. To be liberal is not the same as to tolerate intolerance. And I would like to ask a question to Evan here. If the burqa is limiting the freedom of the woman who's actually wearing it, so what should we liberals do with that?
Okay, Bruno and then Evan.
I think that people wear burqas for very serious reasons, and they're not serious reasons that I would advocate at all, and they're not trivial reasons. They're not trivial reasons of belief or identity, and I wouldn't trivialise them. I think they're very bad reasons. I think they do. The burqa is a symbol of the subordination, whether it's the willing subordination or not, of women, and I wouldn't trivialise that. I think that's quite a serious issue, and it's another discussion. But I don't take seriously the claims of those who want to ban burqas, and I'm very happy to trivialise them, because I don't think they're getting to grips with the real problems, the serious reasons why people wear burqas. I think they're being infantile. I don't think they care about the women who wear burqas. They don't know about them. I'm sure they don't care about it. I really don't think. If you believe that Nicolas Sarkozy and Geert Wilders are motivated by their heartfelt interest in the plight of Muslim women, then I'm sorry, but you're dumb.
Okay, Evan.
Well, let's just deal with this nurse once and for all. Her name's Caroline Petrie. She was 45. She was warned once before that it was not in her job description to pray during working hours for her patients or to approach patients and raise religion with them. And there are good reasons for that. That's why it's in the professional codes of practice. A lot of patients would be worried if they were in hospital and someone came up to them saying, I think we ought to pray. I'm not being trivial. And also, if you have doctors starting asking questions about your religion when you're coming to see them about personal matters, people do worry that they may be judged. So the doctor's perfectly free to have their religious view, but there has to be a separation between that and their professional job. It's very simple, and this victimhood that Christians claim when they're not allowed to do that, when they would object strongly if other people brought in their religion to their activity, is persecution. In fact, it was the Christians who argued very strongly, and I supported them, that they shouldn't be discriminated against. They should have protection in employment and in access to public services from people saying, I'm not going to serve you because you're a Muslim in the shop, because you're a Muslim, or you're a Jew, or you're a Christian. But then they object to the same protection being given to gay people in the same context, and they can't have it both ways.
But she didn't refuse. There was no refusal to fulfill her duties as a nurse. She didn't refuse.
No, I wasn't.
To care for her
there's
patients,
a question about how
conflict.
efficiently you can get around all the patients who need their leg ulcers dressed if you're spending time praying there as well. But the professional codes of practice are very clear. Okay? And this has been debated at length and approved by Parliament, that it is not appropriate for caregivers to engage in the religious aspects of, unless someone asks in a hospital for spiritual care when it can be brought in. That's the way it goes. Just on the burqas, the law is very clear. It is legitimate, okay? It is legitimate and proportionate to ban the burqa, the facial covering, for teachers, and this was upheld by a court recently, because there's an occupational requirement for the face to be seen. Similarly, it is legitimate and proportionate for school uniform policies to place restrictions on religious garb, as long as it's done in a fair way, that is, with consultation. But there isn't any proportionality in having bans in public places, and I strongly disagree with the lady at the back, and with the Turks, and with the French, that there's some issue about in public services. The problem, and I agree with what's been said, and to answer this gentleman's point, if I may, the problem with the burqa is it's a symbol, in some cases, not all, of men oppressing women and requiring them to do it, in some cases. So why criminalise women? Why not seek to work, as best we can, in a democratic and liberal society, to change the attitudes of extremist religion and make clear?
100 years.
Well,
okay,
but I think victimising the victim is probably the wrong approach, because you're simply not going to be able to. The idea of arresting women wearing burqas in their own interest is preposterous.
Okay, this isn't a judgment either way on burqas, but I do take issue with something you said, Bruno, about you said what possible harm can come from a couple of women. Now, I'm surprised no one else has picked up on this, because this is sexism straight out of the 19th century. If it had been men, I'm interested to know, would you think that harm could come from it, or is it just the fact that it's women?
Okay.
It's nothing to do with women.
Yep.
My point is, when is it that a cultural practice becomes a religious belief? Because most of the people in the room are against burqa, which is the full face covering veil, and not the other types of burqas. Now the question is the full face covering veil the essence of a particular religion? Which in my opinion is not. It is a cultural practice. And those people who want to make it as an essence to a religion, it just is like someone who's trying to impose one type of religion on everybody else. It is a cultural practice and has to be dealt in that manner, which is probably wrong.
Evan mentioned how offensive it is it would be very offensive to be asked about your religion if you go to the doctor, and I'm quite grateful that doesn't happen. But I also wish that when I tried to register at my local health centre, that I would not be literally forced to have a smear test before they will allow me to register. I don't appreciate the fact that they ask me about my smoking and drinking habits when I'm asking for medicine for a cold. So there are lots of things that are going on that are offensive, but they're seen as okay because they're part of some kind of secular values rather than religious values. And there is a particular there is a belief that anything that's sort of contaged with religion is particularly harmful. That's not necessarily true. The same thing goes on. The same thing applies to the debate about faith schools. There is a presumption that faith schools are indoctrinating and inculcating all these dangerous values in children, whereas state schools are somehow neutral, value-free. There are no agendas there. There's no there's nothing being transferred to students that's beyond the remits of an educational kind of obligation. So, I mean, I think that certainly equality in public life is really crucial for people to engage in society as equal and free citizens on equal terms. But I agree that we should make a distinction between the public and the private. And in the private sphere, the right to discriminate is crucial, and I think it's an essential right for a civilized, open society, for us to choose who we associate with, who we organize with, who we let in or exclude from our private clubs and stuff.
Thank you. Abid.
Yes, I'm from the same political party in Norway as Lib Dems here, but I strongly disagree with him. I think all cultures are not per se good. All traditions are not per se good, and we need to address those kind of issues. It's not enough to just secure the right to education, learn the language, rule of law and jobs. We need to address the difficult issues of values. And I say I will say that Britain has actually proved that how stupid you can be and how dangerous it is actually to neglect the difficult values. And you've seen that. In 770, just one is a dramatic example of that. But you have a lot of issues with, if you go to the streets in Manchester and Bradford, and the issues I'm talking about. Not addressing these issues is really not just dangerous, but it's also stupid. And we need to talk about values, difficult values, as freedom of speech, equality of women, freedom of religion, corporal punishments, etc., and so on. And many minority women are actually brought up with shame and guilt. Think about that, shame and guilt. To grow up and choose for yourself in a grown-up age, when you're brought up with these things, with shame and guilt, how free are you actually to choose freedom? You're not that free as the liberals often want. So again, to point out, to be liberal is not to be without values and morals. To be liberals is not without ability to differ between right and wrong. And we liberals, we know how to at least point out what's right and wrong, and we should be honest and clear about it.
Okay, thanks. Bruno.
The problem with the burqa ban, essentially, is that they are completely disproportionate to the kind of harm and offence that they actually cause. They're no good for actually dealing with some of the fundamentals that have been raised here and having a real public society-wide debate about some of the issues we've just heard about, because in fact you're really just closing things down. And the other aspect in which they're disproportionate and actually harmful, like the smoking bans, is it takes away from people the responsibility themselves to deal with some of the issues that we raise. The heavy hand of the state arresting or fining women for wearing cloth over their heads won't deal with any of the debates that should rage about multiculturalism, the role of religion in society. All it will do is polarise that debate. It actually stops debate happening.
Okay, thanks. And finally, Evan Harris.
Well, look, let's just deal with the doctor again. If I go to a doctor, I expect the doctor to ask me if I smoke. I don't expect the doctor to ask me how I vote. Okay? There is a difference between the two, Nathalie. Okay? How I vote makes no difference, especially in my case, to whether I need a smear. Okay? But my other parts of my medical history are relevant, and I would say religion, whether I believe in God, is in the irrelevant bit as far as the health service is concerned, and I would say none of your goddamn business, non-religious though I am. Secondly, I do agree with Abid on everything he said, except I don't think the solution to the problem of the subjugation of women, some women, and women generally often by many forms of Islam, is to arrest women who are being made to wear the burqa or who choose to wear the burqa. That is the wrong solution to the problem. I'm absolutely not, nor is my party, in any way morally relativistic. We are very firm and clear on some of these issues, but that's the wrong solution. And to argue that it's a matter of obscuring faces, I find that large beards tend to obscure the faces of men. And I've often mistaken one man for another, and once a woman for, it's a complicated story, okay, because of the growth of hair. Indeed, it's peculiar circles. So we've got to get away from these. We've got to get away from these red herrings. There is a problem, and that's why I argue very strongly for secularism about the approach that many religions, not all, take to women and gay people. You know, women are not treated specially to protect them. They're placed, as Woody Allen put it, beneath a pedestal, not on top of a pedestal, and we need to address that through education and by preventing religions from getting a grip in the public services, and so that we can have that debate and dispute in the private sphere and in social debate without giving them privilege in the public services. And I wait with interest for people to subscribe to the view that religious inculcation at school cannot be a good thing. Let's have school as a space where children are taught to doubt, not to have faith.